The wind stirred across the fields of the Reach as if it were summer's last warm breath before the onset of a cooling autumn. Highgarden gleamed like a beacon, its towers coated in a golden hue that caught the afternoon sun. In the courtyard, Margaery Tyrell stood among a field of roses, some newly planted, others centuries old, as she listened to the sweet rush of the Mander beyond the walls. Normally, such a day would be bright with optimism and laughter, the sort of setting that could coax a smile from the entire realm. Yet a hush had fallen over the keep today, carrying with it a sense of momentous change. She could hear servants murmuring outside the garden gate, exchanging hushed speculation about her impending marriage. Once before, she had prepared for a wedding under happier circumstances. But that ceremony never came to fruition. Chaos in King's Landing and the treacheries that followed had robbed her of every betrothal's promise. There were times she half expected to live out her days in a haze of mourning or to fade into the background of greater political games. Yet this new engagement presented something altogether different, an alliance that might bind the North and the Reach together in a way that seemed unimaginable not long ago. Jon Snow. His name lingered in her thoughts like a stray gust of cold wind. She knew little about him other than rumors, a man of the Night's Watch who had been chosen as their Lord Commander, then betrayed and thrust into the tumult of northern politics. She heard that he was the rumored son of Eddard Stark, though born out of wedlock, and that he bore the hallmarks of honor and stoicism that made the Starks beloved. Tales had swept south of how he fought against the enemies beyond the wall, how he was proclaimed king in the north after the fall of Ramsay Bolton. In the swirl of rumor, he was a mysterious figure, simultaneously a hero and an enigma. Now, by will of the lords who sought peace for a realm still raw from war, Margaery was to marry him. Lady Olenna Tyrell, her grandmother, had arranged the match in a flurry of sharp words and cunning bargains in King's Landing. That woman's iron will did not bend easily, and she had decided that forging a familial bond with the North could bolster the Tyrells' influence in the precarious new world blossoming after the wars. With the Targaryens' uncertain resurgence, Daenerys Targaryen was rumored to be in the east, forging her own path, and the Lannisters still clutching power at King's Landing. The Tyrells sought an alliance sturdy as oak, bound by something more tangible than old feudal loyalties. What better way than wedding the North's new king to a Tyrell daughter? At first, Margaery felt herself stepping cautiously into another engagement orchestrated for political expediency. Memories of her ill-fated marriage to Renly Baratheon still lingered in dark corners of her mind. He had been charming, witty, and altogether enchanting. And yet the arrangement proved fruitless. This time, however, a part of her felt something stir at the mention of Jon Snow's name. She remembered the image of a wolf in the snow, eyes as gray as a storm-laden sky, a soul bound to duty. Perhaps, she told herself, there could be a bond stronger than the usual politicking. Perhaps they might truly find a shared purpose. She turned at the faint crunch of gravel underfoot, her green gown swaying with the movement. Lady Olenna stepped into the garden, her cane tapping softly. Though aged and seemingly frail, her grandmother's intellect gleamed in her eyes. She observed Margaery, studied her face, and let out a quiet hum as she approached. "Lost in thought, child?" Olenna asked, her tone neither unkind nor soothing. Margaery noted that her grandmother had softened just enough to show concern without losing her characteristic sharpness. "I was imagining a snowfall in Highgarden," Margaery said with a faint smile, and trying to picture how the rose bushes would look covered in frost. Olenna's eyes flicked toward the roses. "Well, I hope you don't plan on uprooting them and hauling them to the north. I hear the ground there is as hard as iron most of the year, and you'd be lucky to see anything but pine and barren fields." Margaery chuckled softly, though her gaze didn't break from the roses. "No, grandmother, I only wanted to see if my heart could make sense of this union before the day arrives. It's soon, so soon." "It is. But after all we've endured, a timely marriage is better than another war. The North is a land of fierce traditions. If they grant us a measure of trust, we must treasure it." Olenna paused, her cane tapping once on the ground. "Jon Snow is said to be honorable to a fault. He may lack the southern graces and flattery you're accustomed to hearing, but from what I gather, he does not lie. In a realm of liars, that is worth its weight in gold." Margaery pulled a rose from one of the bushes, inhaled its gentle perfume, and considered her grandmother's words. "He rides south in a fortnight to make his vows, correct?" "Yes. He will come with a retinue of northerners. Lords Manderly, Serwyn, and young Lyanna Mormont, if rumors are true. All apparently hold him in high esteem." Olenna's mouth twisted in a wry grin at the mention of Lyanna Mormont. "A little bear with claws, that one. She could best many a foolish lord with her tongue alone." The prospect of meeting them, the men and women shaped by harsh winters, stirred Margaery's curiosity. "I look forward to welcoming them to Highgarden," she said. I'll show them that ours is a realm of warmth and hospitality, even if we must soon face the storms beyond the neck together. Olenna nodded. Let's just hope we can keep out the real storms when they come. For now, I must speak with Maester Lomond about the final arrangements. We'll talk more later, my dear. She gave Margaery's hand a gentle pat before turning to leave. Alone again, Margaery gazed upon the countless roses. She picked one, carefully avoiding its thorns, and found herself murmuring a silent prayer, not to the seven, not to the old gods, but to whatever forces might allow for an honest marriage in this world of secrets. Perhaps, for once, her life and her heart might align in the same direction. The day Jon Snow left Winterfell for the Reach, the courtyard bustled with preparations. Stable hands readied the horses, wagons were loaded with gifts and tokens of friendship, from sacks of northern grain to barrels of black ale. The crisp morning air bit at his cheeks. He took a moment to glance up at the walls he had come to know so well, the same walls he had once believed would never belong to him. A swirl of nostalgia and uncertainty swam within him. His sister, no, his cousin, he reminded himself, Sansa Stark, stood nearby, wrapped in a thick cloak of gray fur. Despite the wind tugging at her red hair, her posture was steady and regal. She gave instructions to a guard about the day-to-day running of Winterfell during Jon's absence. When she caught his eye, she came forward. A faint smile touched her lips, though worry flitted beneath. Do you have everything you need? She asked, her voice soft. Jon nodded, placing a hand on the pommel of Longclaw at his hip. I have you overseeing the north in my stead. What more could I ask for? She smiled, a fleeting warmth. This is a great alliance. House Tyrell has wealth, resources, and valuable alliances with other southern houses. Marrying Margaery Tyrell. I never wanted a political marriage, Jon admitted, his tone subdued, but the war has taken its toll. The realm needs unity and the Tyrells are eager to forge it. If my wedding can keep the north safe and provide the resources to defend against the threat we both know is coming, then I must accept. Her expression darkened slightly at the mention of that nameless threat. Winter isn't the only thing we fear now, Jon. The dead walking beyond the wall. And other powers stirring in the south. Cersei Lannister still sits the Iron Throne and Daenerys Targaryen lands upon Dragonstone. We're about to be caught in a whirlwind. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Trust in our family and trust in yourself. You've proven you can lead. If anything should go wrong, I will send word. Sansa nodded, her gloved hand covering his briefly. Go, then, and may the old gods and the new bless this union. She leaned forward and placed a light kiss on his cheek. Jon felt the weight of responsibility shift within him. As he mounted his horse, Ghost, his dire wolf, remained at his side. The white wolf's red eyes glowed in the early light, a symbol of the old magic of the north. With a final glance at the keep, Jon rode out at the head of a column of northern lords and knights. Davos Seaworth rode to his right. The old smuggler offered occasional counsel and conversation, though his usual wry humor was less frequent of late. The tension of forging alliances weighed on them all. They had many days of travel ahead. By the time they reached the neck of the continent, winter winds had begun to shift to gentler breezes, and the color of the land slowly changed. The cold, stark plains gave way to rolling fields, and soon the bright green meadows of the Reach were upon them. It felt like entering another world. Even the air smelled sweeter, richer with life. Jon could sense the curiosity in his northern retinue. Many of them had never traveled so far south. Young Lyanna Mormont, riding with the grace of someone twice her age, seemed unimpressed by the opulence of the Reach, but the cluster of Manderly men marveled openly at the sight of lush hillsides. Davos kept his observations to himself, though Jon noticed the older man occasionally glancing at the horizon, as if searching for unseen dangers. The closer they drew to Highgarden, the more frequently they encountered processions of knights and merchants heading to witness the wedding of the king in the north to the Rose of Highgarden. They were greeted by heralds blowing horns, by small folk eager for a glimpse of the northern king. Jon found the attention unnerving. He'd always seen himself as no more than a bastard, sworn to the Night's Watch. Now, he was the subject of toasts and blessings by Southerners who'd never set foot north of the Neck. Such was the nature of power, he supposed. At last, Highgarden rose in the distance, a triumphant sprawl of towers and walls, with gardens descending in terraces toward the Mander. Even in the cooling season, flowers of every hue adorned the castle grounds, painting a tapestry of pink, red, and gold. Music wafted faintly on the breeze. John had expected grandeur, but not the sort that resonated so warmly. Winterfell always had an air of solemnity. Highgarden felt like it pulsed with sunlight, laughter, and celebration. A pang of longing for the north pricked him. Would he ever truly belong here, in a land so different? The gates opened in welcome, and knights in polished armor flanked the entrance. They wore tabards depicting golden roses on a field of green. The Tyrell standard. Jon led his men inside as a steward, dressed in a sumptuous green robe, approached. The steward bowed deeply. "Welcome, your grace, to Highgarden. I am Alistair, appointed by Lord Tarley to oversee your comfort. May I guide you and your men to your quarters." Jon dismounted, patting his horse's neck. Ghost quietly padded forward, drawing several startled looks from the Southerners. Alistair's eyes widened, but he quickly schooled his expression. Jon forced a polite smile. "Thank you, Alistair. My men would be grateful for rest and refreshment." "Of course, your grace. This way, if you please." The steward led them through the courtyard and deeper into the castle grounds. Jon glimpsed broad, arched windows overlooking lavish gardens, fountains sprouting water in artful arcs, and walkways lined with ornate statues. Above it all, the main tower of Highgarden loomed tall, like a sentinel over the Kingdom of Roses. He could almost feel the warmth rising from the sunlit stones beneath his boots. They passed a line of Tyrell guards who saluted in unison. Servants hurried to take the horses to the stables. Lyanna Mormont rode close to Jon and whispered, "It's like another world, my lord." He nodded. "It is, indeed." They were led into the castle, through a corridor with stained glass windows depicting scenes of blooming roses and triumphant knights. Then into a banquet hall, where tables were laden with bread, cheese, fruits, and wines of the region. The smell of fresh bread and roasted meats made Jon's stomach clench in sudden hunger. He realized he had not eaten much that day. "Please, make yourselves comfortable," Alistair offered. "Rooms have been prepared for your retinue in the West Wing. Lord Tyrell and Lady Margaery are eager to meet with you, but they understand your journey has been long." Jon thanked the steward. He noticed Davos scanning the hall with keen eyes, ever the vigilant observer. Nearby, Lyanna Mormont already had her helmet tucked beneath her arm, and her sharp gaze assessed the men about her, refusing to be outdone even in a foreign castle. "Rest, my lords," Jon said to them. "We'll meet with House Tyrell when the sun is lower. For now, see to your comforts. We'll need our strength for the days ahead." With that, he took a moment to breathe in the atmosphere, the sweet scent of roses and fruit, the gentle harp music drifting from an unseen musician, the laughter of servants who didn't carry the weight of an endless winter on their shoulders. It was as though he had stepped from a battlefield into a lavish dream. That evening, a summons arrived. Jon was asked to join Lady Margaery Tyrell in one of Highgarden's smaller private salons, a place for conversation away from the busy feasting halls. He made his way there, accompanied by Davos, who insisted on standing guard at the door, then nodded for the older man to remain outside. Jon entered and found Margaery standing near a wide window that overlooked the gardens. She wore a gown of pale green embroidered with golden thread, simple compared to the more extravagant dresses she'd been known to wear at King's Landing, yet no less elegant. The fading sunlight danced across her dark, curling hair. At the sound of the door closing, she turned, and for a moment, Jon was aware of how quietly the world seemed to settle. She was more beautiful than rumor suggested, yet there was a hint of something deeper in her eyes, wisdom born of hardship, perhaps. Her lips curved into a smile. "Your Grace," she said softly, dipping into a polite curtsy. Her voice carried warmth like a gentle breeze across the plains. Jon felt the awkwardness gnaw at him. He never liked being called Your Grace. He knew well the sense of unworthiness that came from his bastard heritage. But this was the courtesy of the South, and he would have to bear it. He gave a small bow of his head. "Lady Margaery." Her gaze flicked to the window, then back to him, lingering thoughtfully. "I trust your journey was uneventful?" "It was long, but without trouble," he replied, stepping closer. He forced himself to maintain eye contact, something that seemed surprisingly easy with her. "Your hospitality is generous." She inclined her head. "We are glad to receive you here at Highgarden. These last years have been unkind to so many. It's past time the realm had cause for celebration instead of mourning." Jon nodded, noticing her choice of words. He knew she had lost much, her family, her standing at King's Landing, the tragedies that befell House Tyrell during the war. He cleared his throat. "I understand that we are to be wed soon." A quick flash of amusement swept across her features, tempered by sincerity. "Yes. Grandmother and others believe it best to formalize our alliance without delay. Do you find that too hasty? Jon hesitated, measuring his response. I think we should do what's best for the realm. If uniting the North and the Reach helps everyone weather the coming storms, I'm willing. She took a step toward him, her hands folded before her. He could smell a hint of rosewater and some subtle perfume clinging to her. An alliance can be more than mere convenience, she said, voice softer. I hope we can strive for some measure of true partnership. The North needs southern harvests, the Reach needs the honor and loyalty of the North. That is the practical aspect. But more than that, perhaps we can stand as a symbol of new beginnings. Jon found himself unexpectedly moved by her sincerity. In the back of his mind, he recalled the cunning masks worn by so many players in the Game of Thrones. He wondered if her kindness was just another mask. But there was something in her open, earnest gaze that hinted at genuine hope. I never wanted to be king, he said quietly, but if there's one thing I've learned, it's that honor can guide us where politics fail. If we can remain honest with each other, we may achieve something lasting. She smiled again, and this time it reached her eyes. I couldn't agree more, Jon. For a moment, the two simply stood there in comfortable silence. Beyond the window, twilight crept over the gardens, turning the flowers into dark silhouettes. Jon felt his heart steady, as though this brief exchange had set a foundation for whatever was to come. The wedding day arrived more quickly than Jon expected. Highgarden thrummed with activity as servants hung garlands of flowers and banners bearing both the dire wolf of House Stark and the golden rose of House Tyrell. The sun rose bright and clear over the orchard-laden hills, bathing the castle in soft warmth. Despite the pressures swirling around him, Jon found a sense of calm in the early morning. In a small courtyard set aside for meditation, he practiced his sword forms with Ghost at his side, feeling the gentle southern air on his skin. He wanted to anchor himself before stepping into the swirling pageantry that would define the rest of his life. When the hour arrived, trumpets sounded across the courtyard. Lords and ladies from all corners of Westeros were seated in the grand garden amphitheater. Rows of marble benches flanked a small platform framed by flowering vines. The Seven had few followers in the north, but a septon had been brought in for the southern customs. Jon wore a dark cloak embroidered with a silver dire wolf on the breast. His hair was tied back in a simple knot. He stood at the end of the aisle flanked by a handful of northern bannermen, including Lyanna Mormont and Davos. Though the setting was magnificent, a coiled tension sat in his chest. Margaery emerged, escorted by her grandmother. She wore a flowing gown of pale gold that shimmered in the sunlight, and upon her head was a delicate crown of woven gold filigree. A hush fell over the assembly as she walked, each step graceful, embodying the refinement that so defined the Tyrell family. Jon thought back to the countless weddings that had ended in sorrow across the realm, reminders of how fragile even the grandest ceremonies could be. Yet as Margaery drew closer, her gaze met his. There was an unspoken reassurance in the slight tilt of her lips, as if urging him to see beyond past tragedies. They stood before the septon. Sansa had come south in secret, arriving the day before with Brienne to witness this union, though she kept a low profile to avoid undue attention. Her presence soothed Jon more than she would ever know. He could sense her standing near the edge of the crowd, proud, supportive. Lady Olenna took a seat, her expression unreadable but her eyes shrewd. The septon began the rites, speaking of the sacred vow that bound man and woman in the eyes of the Seven. He spoke of unity, of duty, of the ways in which the burdens of leadership could be shared in matrimony. Jon felt his throat tighten. For so long, he denied himself any dream of marriage or children, believing his vows to the Night's Watch or the circumstances of his birth would forbid it. Now everything was changing. Margaery placed her hand in his, and they recited the traditional vows. Her voice was firm and bright. Jon's own voice sounded steady, if quieter. At the septon's instruction, Jon removed his dark cloak and draped a cloak of stark gray trimmed with white fur over Margaery's shoulders, symbolically bringing her under his protection. She looked regal yet somehow approachable, a rose touched by snow, standing in the sunlight. When the septon announced them man and wife, cheers erupted through the garden, accompanied by applause and the sound of trumpets. 1,000 petals rained down from above, poured by servants stationed on the walls. Margaery raised her face to the fluttering rose petals, and Jon felt the subtle squeeze of her fingers around his. He lowered his voice so only she could hear. "Thank you for accepting me, my lady." She turned her head slightly. "We should not live in fear of the future. Not today." A grand feast followed. The courtyard and banquet halls rang with music. Tables groaned under roasted meats, fresh fruits, and exotic sweets. Large barrels of arbor gold were tapped, and the crowd's spirits soared. Jon sat at the high table with Margaery, his newly wedded wife, observing the swirl of festivities. He noticed the subtle differences from the stark feasts of Winterfell. Here, laughter seemed freer, and the palette of colors was brighter than anywhere he'd seen in the north. Throughout the feast, lords approached with gifts and pledges. Lord Manderly, broad and beaming, presented a sealskin cloak from White Harbor, embroidered with the Stark sigil to honor the Union. A representative of the Dornish, tanned and sly-eyed, offered rare summer fruits and warm words of future alliances. Even Lord Tarly was in attendance, though his stance toward the marriage seemed lukewarm at best. He spoke curtly, mostly out of respect for the Tyrells. Margaery navigated the crowd with polished ease, accepting compliments and conversing with graceful efficiency. She included Jon wherever possible, drawing him into topics regarding the North, its wildlife, and customs. Despite the occasional awkwardness, he found himself learning that Margaery was more than a pretty face. She was a deft diplomat, forging small bridges with every conversation. As the musicians struck up a lively tune, some guests took to the dance floor. Margaery turned to Jon, inclining her head playfully. "It is customary for the bride and groom to share a dance," she said. Jon hesitated, recalling the last time he tried to dance at Winterfell as a boy. Robb had teased him mercilessly while Arya hid her laughter behind her hands. "I'm not much of a dancer," he admitted. Her smile was reassuring. "Then I'll guide you." They stepped into the center of the courtyard where a circle of onlookers had formed. The music lifted and Margaery took Jon's hand. The crowd parted for them. Though he moved stiffly at first, Margaery's gentle insistence helped him find a semblance of rhythm. She led with subtle grace, her gown swirling around her ankles. Jon focused on the press of her hand against his, the faint rose perfume that accompanied her every motion, and gradually he relaxed. Laughter rippled through the spectators as the once austere king in the north glided, albeit carefully, alongside his new queen. When the song ended, applause thundered and Margaery's eyes sparkled. "You dance better than you believe," she teased, leaning in with a quiet laugh. Before he could reply, they were approached by several well-wishers. Lord Garland Tyrell, Margaery's brother, clasped Jon's arm. "A lovely ceremony. I hope we'll see a lasting peace from this day forward." Jon nodded, grateful for the sincerity in Garland's voice. But he couldn't quite quell the persistent worry that the battles to come, those that truly mattered, had yet to unfold. For tonight, though, he pushed the concern aside. He had promised Margaery, promised himself, that at least for this one day they would not dwell on doom. Night settled on Highgarden in soft shadows and warm torchlight. As was traditional, Jon and Margaery were escorted to the bedchamber prepared for them. Servants, tipsy on wine, left flowers on every surface, roses strewn across the bed, vases brimming with fresh blooms. Outside, the boisterous singing and laughter from the feast continued into the late hours. When they were finally alone, Jon stood by a tall window that looked out over the moonlit gardens. Margaery entered behind him, the rustle of her gown trailing across the floor. Nervousness tugged at Jon's chest. He turned to face her. She had removed her formal crown, letting her curls fall more naturally around her face. "We don't have to," he began, searching for the right words. "I mean, if you'd rather wait." She stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "I appreciate your concern, Jon." Her gaze was soft, imbued with patience. "I'm no stranger to weddings and the expectations placed on a married couple, but I know you've lived a different life. This union was arranged to serve the realm, but it's our choice how we move forward." He nodded, relieved at her openness. "I've taken vows before, to the Night's Watch. And I've had complicated circumstances with." He paused. A flash of memory, Ygritte in a cave, the scent of hot springs and stolen kisses. He coughed gently. "Things have changed so quickly." Her expression carried empathy. "Do you wish to speak of it?" Jon considered, then shook his head. "Maybe another time." She simply nodded. "I understand more than you might think. My own life has been shaped by demands I never anticipated." She hesitated, then reached for the belt at her waist and began to loosen it. Her posture held no arrogance or entitlement. Instead, she offered a kind of invitation. "Let us set aside burdens and fear for this night, if we can. We are both tired of endless duty, yes?" Jon swallowed. "Yes," he managed. and that was the moment they closed the gap between them. Tentative at first, testing the fragile boundary between alliance and companionship. Later, as moonlight streamed through the tall windows, they lay side by side, quiet and pensive. Jon listened to Margaery's breathing and felt a shift in the world around him. He had never expected a marriage that might bring with it an unexpected comfort. He had braced himself for political transactions, for a sense of duty only, but there was solace in this woman's warmth, someone who understood the weight of leadership. He told himself that perhaps there was hope in forging something genuine within the realm's endless machinations. Dawn in Highgarden came in a haze of golden sunlight. Banners waved in a gentle breeze. Already, the courtyard bustled again with servants tidying up after the wedding feast, while a few lords prepared to depart. Jon dressed in his traveling leathers, half out of habit. King or not, he found solace in the practicality of worn leather, especially in a foreign place. Margaery remained behind for a moment, speaking quietly with her grandmother in a side chamber. He found himself meandering through the garden terraces, savoring the peace. Ghost padded at his side, causing a stir among the gardeners. Then he heard soft footsteps. Turning, he saw Margaery approaching. She wore a simpler gown, pale blue with modest embroidery, her hair braided loosely. "Your grandmother seemed concerned," Jon remarked as she neared. Margaery's eyes flicked with mild amusement. "She's always concerned. She wants assurances that House Tyrell will remain influential. She also wants to ensure that when the time comes for us to speak on behalf of the realm's future, we'll do so with the Tyrell name prominently involved." Jon sighed. "I'm not adept at these political maneuvers." She took his arm gently. "Perhaps you don't need to be adept in the Southern style. The North has its own form of politics, blunt, transparent. You have honor, which has become a rare commodity. People value that, especially after so many betrayals. One day at a time, Jon." He gave her a half-smile, touched by her confidence. It was still strange to feel warmth toward someone he'd met so recently. Yet the events of the last few days, and the genuine, if cautious, intimacy they'd shared, had planted a small seed of trust between them. For once, the notion of sharing responsibility with another person didn't feel like a distant dream. As they walked along the terrace, they came upon a fountain adorned with carved roses, water trickling softly. Margaery paused, glancing at the reflection of the sky in the shallow pool. "The war has left scars on these lands, Jon, even if they aren't obvious. The people here still mourn my father, my brother, many of them were lost in the conflict. There's a quiet desperation in the Reach to avoid more bloodshed. They've seen how quickly fortunes can turn." Jon recalled the fields beyond Highgarden. He'd seen villages along the way that were only just beginning to recover. "In the north, we face a threat worse than any southern war. The Night King, the army of the dead. I know some don't believe it, but it's real. And if the realm doesn't unite, there will be no difference between north and south once they come." She nodded thoughtfully. "We must convince the lords, one by one if necessary. House Tyrell has many allies. If we can rally the Reach, perhaps we can sway others." He paused by the fountain, studying her face. "Would you come to Winterfell with me once we've done what we must here?" "Of course," she said. "I am your wife now, and I would see your home, understand your world. I'd like to see the seat of House Stark with my own eyes." Jon couldn't help but feel relief. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "There's much to do, but having you beside me might make the wait more bearable." A soft smile touched her lips. "Then we shall share it." That afternoon, plans began to form. House Tyrell had arranged a grand tour of the Reach for Jon and Margaery, a display of unity and gratitude, allowing them to visit vassal houses and show a united front. Olenna insisted it would bolster the new alliance and gather support for the cause, though privately, Jon suspected it was also a means of reassuring the lords in the Reach that their beloved Margaery was safe and content under the Stark banner. The retinue set out a few days later. Their first stop was Old Town, second largest city in the realm and seat of House Hightower. Margaery was well known there. The city's highborn greeted her with admiration, showering them both with gifts and well wishes. Jon was somewhat overwhelmed by the scale and grandeur of the city's architecture, the hustle of its harbor, and the presence of the massive Hightower rising into the sky. He met with the archmasters of the Citadel, hoping to gather more knowledge about the undead threat. Most were skeptical, though a few seemed intrigued by the possibility of White Walkers. On Margaery's suggestion, he promised to host any maesters willing to travel north and study the phenomenon directly. Next, they traveled inland to the smaller holds that had sworn fealty to Highgarden for centuries. In each place, Margaery took time to speak with the small folk, distributing food and resources where she could. Jon noticed how easily she won their confidence. When she introduced him as her husband, the newly minted king in the north, the peasants eyed him curiously. Some had never seen a northerner. The children especially gawked at his furs and at Ghost. Yet by the time they departed, Jon could see the shift in their expressions, wariness replaced by an odd sort of gratitude, simply because Margaery trusted him and he had shown them kindness in turn. In the evenings, they dined with local lords. Jon made small talk over candlelit tables, while Margaery skillfully steered conversations to the importance of unity. She never forced the subject of the dead in the north, but she planted seeds of awareness, describing how House Stark had battled wildling invasions and the unnatural cold. Jon added grim details when prompted, making no attempt to soften the truth. If they were to win the Living's War, every corner of Westeros needed to be prepared. Throughout the tour, they rode side by side. Jon often found himself studying his wife. She was gentle with the small folk, shrewd with the lords, and affectionate, if reserved, when they were alone. She listened to his stories about the Wall, about his childhood in Winterfell, about the siblings he had lost and those who remained. In turn, she confided glimpses of her past marriages, her experiences under Cersei's scrutiny in King's Landing, the sorrow of losing her father and brother in the war. Each revelation chipped away at the barriers between them. One night, after a feast in a modest castle near the Mander's tributaries, they slipped away to the roof to escape the clamor. Moonlight bathed the parapets. Margaery shivered slightly in the cooling air. Jon draped his cloak over her shoulders, recalling the wedding ceremony. She tilted her head back to look at the stars. Sometimes, I used to dream of being a simple girl, living in a small cottage in the countryside. Margaery mused, her words quiet in the stillness. No titles, no political schemes. Just the earth and my family, and the sunrise each morning. But I suppose we don't get to choose our destinies. Jon smiled wryly. I used to dream of being part of a family without the label of bastard. But we can't escape who we are. He paused, then added, yet here we stand, forging something new. Maybe that's all we can ask for. She rested her hand over his. Perhaps it is. And I've learned that what we build together can be stronger than any role we were assigned at birth. Jon looked out over the fields. In the distance, the soft shape of farmland merged with the night sky. Stronger, maybe, if the realm stands with us, he said. It's strange. All this talk of White Walkers and war seems so distant to these people. They haven't seen the horrors you and I know to be real. She intertwined her fingers with his, her voice solemn. Then let us be the bridge between worlds. You'll show them the truth, and I'll ensure they listen. Jon felt the weight of those words resonate within him. This woman, who had endured so much in the southern courts, was now prepared to stand with him against an unimaginable threat. He wondered if the gods had any hand in such matters, or if all was simply chance. Whatever the answer, he was grateful for her resolve. Their final stop on the tour was Horn Hill, seat of House Tarly. Though the Tarleys were bannermen to Highgarden, Randall Tarley's reputation as a strict and prideful lord had preceded him. Margaery insisted their presence was crucial to cementing the alliance, and Jon reluctantly agreed. While they rode up the winding road to Horn Hill, he noticed neat farmland stretching in every direction, meticulously maintained. The keep itself stood on a small cliff overlooking a river gorge, imposing in a quiet, stern way. They arrived to a formal greeting from Lord Tarly and his household. The older man bowed stiffly, his gaze passing over Jon with a measuring look, then lingering on Margaery. "My lady, your arrival is most welcome." "Your grace," he said, nodding begrudgingly at Jon. His tone gave away his reservations. He might respect a king in the north, but it didn't mean he was happy about seeing a bastard elevated by the chaos of war. Margaery was all courtesy. "Lord Tarly, thank you for hosting us. We have heard that your lands have seen a bountiful harvest. I trust the war's ravages were not too harsh here." He exhaled. "We fared better than many, my lady. The Tarly men fought bravely when called upon." He looked to Jon. "And we stand ready to do so again, if need be." It was the closest to an olive branch Lord Tarly would offer. Jon managed a firm nod. "Your strength is renowned across the realm, my lord. I have no doubt you'd be a valuable ally in the wars to come." That evening, they dined in Horn Hill's great hall. It was a simpler affair than Highgarden's lavish feast, but the roast venison and spiced wine were delicious. Jon sat beside Margaery, exchanging pleasantries. Lady Tarly was present, a quiet, dignified woman who kept her eyes lowered most of the time. Their daughter Tala was there as well, a timid creature who looked at Margaery with starstruck admiration. Jon recalled that Samwell Tarly, now a sworn brother of the Night's Watch, was once the heir to this house. He recognized the tension behind Lord Tarly's eyes when Sam's name was mentioned. Clearly, the father still bristled over Sam's choice, or rather, the father's command that Sam join the Watch. Jon tried to avoid that topic, focusing instead on current affairs. Margaery guided the conversation toward the importance of unifying resources. She spoke softly but convincingly of the threat from the north of Whites and White Walkers. While Tala looked terrified, Lord Tarly maintained a stony expression. "Superstitions," he finally grumbled. "We hear many tales, my lady. Giants, children of the forest, shadows. And yet the only foes we've seen have been men." Jon set down his cup. "I've fought them. I've lost friends to them. I have no reason to lie about this threat." Lord Tarly's eyes flicked to Ghost, curled by Jon's feet. Perhaps he recognized the significance of a direwolf. "Be that as it may, I am a practical man. If it comes to war, we must have tangible evidence. These claims of the undead sound too far-fetched." Margaery intervened gently. "Lord Tarly, would you be willing to send scouts north, to see for themselves?" He looked skeptical but didn't immediately refuse. "It would take time to arrange such a journey. Perhaps. We shall see." As the conversation drifted to more mundane subjects, Jon felt frustration simmer. But Margaery placed her hand lightly on his beneath the table, a silent reminder to remain calm. Though Lord Tarly was inflexible, he wasn't outright dismissing them. That alone was progress, however small. When the meal ended, Margaery excused herself to speak with Lady Tarly and Tala. Jon lingered, stepping outside into Horn Hill's courtyard to cool his temper under the stars. He found himself at the edge of the battlements, gazing over farmland that glowed faintly in the moonlight. Then footsteps signaled someone approaching from behind. "It takes more than stories to bend the will of Randall Tarly," came Margaery's voice. Jon turned, studying her silhouette against the torches. "He's a stubborn man." She laughed softly. "All men of the Reach have their pride. Some are simply more stubborn than others." He leaned back against the stone, exhaling. "We don't have time for stubborn. The threat grows stronger. Every moment we spend convincing Southern lords might be a moment lost." Margaery moved closer. "I know, but recall that you faced disbelief in the north as well. Even Stannis Baratheon, who saw the proof at the wall, struggled to convince others of the threat's seriousness." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Changing hearts and minds is slow work, but we are not alone in this." Jon's gaze softened. He reached up, covering her hand with his own. "I'm no used to the slow work of politics. My father, Eddard Stark, wasn't either. He found deception distasteful, and it cost him. Sometimes I wonder if we can play this game without losing ourselves." She nodded in empathy. "Let us not speak of deception, then. Let us deal in truth. We will keep telling our story until it resonates. House by house, lord by lord." Jon turned back to the horizon. "And if it's not enough?" Margaery's voice was gentle. "Then we will do what must be done, even if we stand alone at first." In the quiet that followed, Jon felt a small surge of gratitude. He had never expected to find such a partner in political maneuvering. someone who could face the intricacies of southern negotiation while understanding the gravity of northern realities. He recalled the vow they made, "I am yours and you are mine." Perhaps it was more than the empty phrase it often became in arranged marriages. Perhaps it was the beginning of a true bond. They left Horn Hill with measured goodwill from Lord Tarley and made their way back toward Highgarden. Summer was receding, and the subtle shift in temperature reminded Jon of the unrelenting approach of winter. The nights felt cooler, the fields less vibrant. At last, the sprawling castle of Highgarden appeared on the horizon. Though Jon was eager to return to Winterfell and prepare for the real battles to come, he knew they had one final set of matters to attend to: forging the official treaties between House Stark and House Tyrell, ensuring that grain and troops would be sent north when required. It wouldn't be easy, even with Margaery's influence, but it was necessary. Upon their return, Lady Olenna greeted them in a solar filled with tapestries of blooming flowers. She eyed them both sharply, as if assessing whether their union had strengthened. They exchanged pleasantries, and soon enough, talk turned to the practicalities of alliance. Olenna demanded that certain trade routes be reserved for Tyrell merchants, while Jon insisted on guaranteed shipments of provisions to Winterfell. Back and forth they went, hammering out each clause. Margaery often served as mediator, her voice calm and persuasive. After hours of negotiation, they reached a tentative agreement. As the meeting concluded, Olenna dismissed the attendants, leaving only the three of them. She fixed Jon with her hawkish gaze. "King in the north, you and I share a goal: ensuring Margaery's safety and the future of our houses. The Tyrells have suffered dearly in these wars. Do not think we will allow that to happen again without retribution." Jon respected her candor, though it made him uneasy. "I have no desire to cause further suffering, my lady. The war I seek to fight is against the undead in the north." Olenna leaned on her cane. Yes, if your walking corpses are truly real, then it might threaten us all. But you must understand something. Many lords, especially in the south, dismiss such tales as fantasy. They need proof or a powerful demonstration." He frowned. "And how would you suggest I provide that demonstration?" She let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, I don't know. Perhaps capture one of those creatures and drop it in the middle of the throne room at King's Landing. That might wake Cersei from her delusions." Margaery bristled slightly. "Grandmother." Olenna waved a hand. "An old woman's jest, child. My point stands. The time for half measures will soon end. If the threat is as dire as you say, the realm must be galvanized in a dramatic way. And drama is something we Tyrells can help you with, if needed." Jon exchanged a glance with Margaery, who lowered her eyes briefly. There was truth to Olenna's words. Hard though it may be, some grand gesture might be required to rally the entire continent. A silent determination formed in Jon's mind. "Well," Olenna said, turning her attention to her granddaughter, "I trust your tours went well. The small folk adore you, as always. I received favorable reports from Old Town and the vassals." She tapped her cane, her eyes shifting between them. "It appears you two present a fine front. Let's hope you remain so united when the Real storms come." Her parting words hung in the air long after she had left. 2 weeks later, Jon's retinue prepared to depart Highgarden. Carts filled with supplies lined the courtyard. Margaery's handmaids readied her personal possessions for the journey north. Furs had been ordered from the best southern workshops, and Margaery even arranged for a selection of hardy seedlings to be transported north in the hopes of introducing new flora to Winterfell's glass gardens. On the final morning, Jon and Margaery stood at the gates, bid farewell by a small assembly of Tyrell knights and Olenna, who watched from a gilded litter. Margaery's expression contained mixed emotions. She was leaving the only home she'd truly known. Yet Jon saw a steely resolve beneath the surface. She wanted to see Winterfell, to stand beside him where the threat was real and present, to be his queen in the north. They mounted their horses. Margaery glanced back at Highgarden's ivy-clad walls and whispered, "Farewell. May the Seven guide us back someday." Jon reached out and squeezed her hand. Together, they guided their horses forward. A cheer rose from a handful of onlookers, and soon they were on the open road. The fields of the Reach unfurled before them, golden under the midday sun. As they traveled, Margaery seemed lost in thought. Jon occasionally asked if she was well, and she merely smiled, nodding. She spent much of the journey speaking with Davos or Lyanna Mormont, learning more about the North's customs. The young Lady Mormont offered blunt opinions on everything from strategy to soup. Margaery listened without condescension, surprising Lyanna with her serious regard. Gradually, a curious kinship formed, uniting Mormont bluntness with Tyrell courtesy. Eventually, they reached the crossing known as the Rose Road, winding north toward the heart of the continent. With each league, the temperature dropped. The fertile plains grew sparser, the nights colder. Jon could sense Margaery's apprehension when they entered the neck, with its wetlands and chill mists, but she faced it bravely, asking questions about local plants and wildlife. She noticed the subtle changes in the architecture, the people's accents, even their manner of dress. Then, as they passed Moat Cailin, the great ruin that guarded the entry to the north, Jon felt an odd sense of coming home, though so much had changed. They pressed on, traveling by day and seeking shelter at small keeps or inns by night. More than once, as they huddled in a firelit hall, Jon caught Margaery shivering despite her warm furs. He offered her more layers, and she accepted with a grateful smile. At last, Winterfell's gray ramparts appeared on the horizon. Snow swirled across the fields, a reminder that the warm south was far behind them. Smoke curled from the chimneys. The old castle stood steadfast against the encroaching cold. Jon saw Margaery's eyes widen slightly at the sight. No flowers, no bright colors, just a stark fortress hunched under an iron sky. They rode through the gates, and the northern banners dipped in respect. Sansa and a host of Northmen waited in the courtyard. She stepped forward to greet them, her hair hidden beneath a heavy hood. A small smile tugged at her lips when she saw Margaery. "Lady Margaery, welcome to Winterfell." Margaery dismounted carefully, mindful of the icy ground. "Thank you, Lady Sansa. It is an honor to stand at last where House Stark has kept its seat for generations." Jon watched them exchange pleasantries, recalling that Margaery once offered Sansa friendship in King's Landing. Felt like years ago, a lifetime. Now they had a chance to renew that connection on more stable ground. As the wind whipped snow around them, Sansa gestured for them to enter. The warmth of the great hall beckoned. The household bustled, preparing hot meals, stoking fires. Jon guided Margaery down the corridors, pointing out the library, the larder, the passages that led to the crypts. She listened attentively, though her nose and cheeks were reddened by the chill. In their private solar, a fire crackled in the hearth. Margaery sank into a chair, removing her gloves. "It is cold," she said with a half-laugh, "but it feels alive. You can sense the history here." Jon settled beside her. "I grew up in these halls. They can be somber, especially in winter, but they are home." He looked into the flames, remembering how many times he'd sat by this very hearth, longing for acceptance. She reached for his hand. "Home," she echoed softly. "Then let me share it with you. Let this be our stronghold, ours to protect." He turned, meeting her gaze. In that moment, the reality of their alliance, their marriage, crystallized. He wasn't alone in his fight. Margaery Tyrell, once the Rose of Highgarden, now his wife, would stand by his side against the darkest of threats. The flicker of the fire reflected in her eyes, mirroring the spark of determination in both of them. "Let it be so," Jon agreed. "The Stark-Tyrell bond. May it stand against all to come." And as the wind howled outside, swirling snow through the courtyard of Winterfell, their pact glowed fiercely in the lamplight, an ember of hope in a world on the brink of a long, dark winter. In the days that followed their arrival in Winterfell, the North slowly revealed itself to Margaery in every creaking floorboard of the ancient castle, in every snowdrift that gathered beneath the towers, in every hollow wind that whistled across the battlements. The scale of it, both the land's expanse and the spirit of its people, humbled her. She moved carefully through the courtyards and corridors, learning names and faces of the men and women who tended to the Stark stronghold, the blacksmith who hammered at the forge by dawn, the stable boys who always smelled faintly of hay, the washerwomen who hunched over steaming basins in the scullery. Some were shy and used to a southern lady's presence, but she won them over by offering genuine interest in their work. It did not go unnoticed. Jon watched her now and then from the sidelines, half in awe at how swiftly she adapted, half in silent gratitude that she was making the effort at all. He remembered his time in the Night's Watch, how every day felt like a test of endurance. Marriage brought a different kind of challenge, but Margaery seemed determined to meet it head-on. She never complained of the cold, though he could see her breath fog in the air when she rose each morning. She draped herself in furs, wearing thick wool dresses in muted colors more in line with northern fashion. Sansa often accompanied her in the mornings, providing subtle counsel on how best to navigate the local customs, who to praise, who to heed, who to placate. The ladies seldom spoke of the horrors Margaery had survived at King's Landing, but a quiet understanding passed between them. Both had been shaped by the capital's cruelty. Winterfell's Great Hall became a center of discussion and planning. Lords and ladies arrived one by one in the weeks following Jon and Margaery's return: Karstarks, Serwyns, Glovers, and Manderleys. They came in response to letters Jon had sent, urging them to prepare for what was coming from beyond the wall. Margaery offered southern grace, greeting each delegation with small courtesies and warm smiles, but the business at hand was grave. Though the North had endured many wars in recent years, the threat of the dead walking still tested belief. Some families lent immediate support, remembering how the Boltons had been overthrown only because the northern houses finally banded together under Jon's command. Others expressed polite skepticism, hoping that the troubles beyond the wall might be exaggerated. Late one night, after hours of listening to the proud voices of older lords who doubted the White Walker's existence, Margaery found Jon in the library. He stood by a table laden with books brought back from the Citadel by Samwell Tarly. By the flickering light of lanterns, she watched him scan a tome thick with dust, pausing occasionally to rub his temples. She cleared her throat gently, and he glanced up. "Still studying?" she asked, stepping closer. "Sansa told me you've been here most of the night." He let out a weary breath. "I'm trying to find more references to the long night, to the magics that might help us. I'd hoped the Citadel's texts could provide something concrete." He tapped the open book in frustration. "So far, we have myths, vague mentions of dragon steel, Valyrian steel, and half-remembered accounts of the children of the forest. Nothing that tells us how to stop an army of the dead." She touched the corner of a page, careful not to damage the parchment. "We rely on fragments, then piece them together as best we can. Not so different from what we must do with our alliances, is it? We gather the support of various lords and ladies, trusting that when the moment comes, they'll stand with us." Jon's eyes lingered on her face, reflecting the lamplight. "You've been talking to them every day, haven't you? Helping them understand why this matters." She offered a faint smile. "I do what I can. Many remain unconvinced, but they know one truth for certain: they have a king who fought beyond the wall, whose name commands respect. If not for that, they'd all be squabbling about farmland and old feuds." He exhaled, tension softening from his shoulders. "Thank you. Sometimes I forget how to speak to them. I've always relied on honesty, but that only goes so far when the threat is unimaginable. It helps to have a queen who knows something of impossible situations," she teased lightly. Then her tone grew earnest again. "Let's not doubt ourselves. We have to be steadfast, or we'll give them reason to falter." Jon closed the book, sliding it aside. The movements of his hands were careful, as though every book might be precious for the knowledge it contained. "You're right," he said. "I'll keep trying. We'll need to keep the lines of communication open with the rest of Westeros, too. If the Night King breaks through, winter itself will descend on the entire continent." "I've sent letters to Highgarden," Margaery said. "Grandmother is speaking to whatever southern lords she can, especially those who might place some faith in me. But until we have definitive proof, many will consider this a northern superstition. They haven't seen what you and your men have seen." He nodded grimly, then gestured for her to join him at a corner of the table. "There's another matter. Daenerys Targaryen is said to have landed at Dragonstone. She has dragons, if rumors hold true. That alone could turn the tide if the Night King invades. But dealing with a Targaryen claimant to the throne poses risks of its own." Margaery's lips parted in thought. "She has a strong claim, but the realm is fractured, and Cersei Lannister still sits the Iron Throne with no intention of yielding. The Tyrells would naturally be drawn to Daenerys as an ally against Cersei, especially after my family's losses at the hands of the crown. But to place one's faith in dragons, that is a dangerous game." Jon's expression hardened. "I've heard she demands fealty from all who come before her. Bend the knee or face her wrath. Yet if the fate of the living depends on fire against ice, we must tread carefully. Perhaps your friend Samwell can glean more from the Citadel. Or we might need to seek out Daenerys ourselves to convince her that if she wants a kingdom to rule, she'll need to fight for the survival of its people first." Jon's gaze flickered down to her hand, resting lightly on the table. "You'd be willing to go south again so soon?" "For the right cause, yes," she replied, lifting her chin. "Besides, we married to unite the realm. If that means traveling to Dragonstone to treat with a Targaryen, so be it." He nodded, and a gentle quiet settled between them. After a moment, Margaery touched his arm. "Come to bed soon, my lord. We have council at dawn, and I need you rested." He managed a hint of a smile. "You sound like Sansa. One more reason to heed my advice." Then she pressed a quick, warm kiss to his cheek and left him to his books, the faint scent of roses following in her wake. He lingered a while longer, though he no longer had the heart to continue poring over moldy parchment. Thoughts of a Targaryen queen, of undead armies, and of the uncertain alliances that might or might not hold up under pressure kept his mind spinning. Eventually, he closed his eyes, determined to find whatever scrap of rest he could manage. By the time the next morning's council convened, a fresh snowfall had coated the courtyard in pristine white. Sansa arrived first, wearing a gown of gray and a cloak trimmed with fur. She stood at the head of the table in Winterfell's council chamber, waiting patiently. Davos Seaworth joined her, quietly exchanging pleasantries. Lyanna Mormont sat with a poised ferocity that belied her age, her small hands folded on the table. Lords Glover, Serwyn, and Royce, who had come from the area as a representative of Robin Arryn, found seats. Margaery arrived with an air of composed grace, offering polite greetings, earning measured nods from the more reserved northern lords. Then Jon entered, dusting snow from his shoulders. He took his seat, glancing around. "Any word from Eastwatch or Castle Black?" he asked, directing the question at Davos. Davos shook his head. "Ravens arrived this morning. No new sightings. They say the wildlings under Tormund's command continue to patrol, but so far, nothing unusual. Yet the cold intensifies each day." Lord Glover rested an elbow on the table. "We're as ready as we can be for a threat that remains unseen. Our men grow restless, waiting for a battle that may or may not come." Margaery spoke up, her tone gentle but firm. "We must remain vigilant, my lord. The fact that we don't see the threat yet does not lessen its danger. Wars can be won or lost before the first arrow is loosed, depending on how prepared we are." Lyanna Mormont nodded in fierce agreement. "House Mormont stands by the king in the north. My men will not falter, no matter how long the wait." A ripple of solidarity passed around the room, though Lord Serwyn cast a doubtful glance at Margaery. "We do appreciate your counsel, my lady," he said, "but we have always handled northern matters ourselves. The presence of House Tyrell is new to us, and some wonder if your influences might steer us southward in conflicts that are not our own." Jon straightened in his chair. "This is not merely a northern conflict. It's a conflict of the living against the dead. House Tyrell has joined the north because Margaery and her kin understand what is at stake. We are no longer separate realms if the Night King breaches the wall." Margaery folded her hands. "House Tyrell does not wish to undermine northern customs or leadership, Lord Serwyn. I stand with Jon because I believe in this cause. And I will do everything in my power, everything my house can offer, to protect these lands that are now mine as well." Serwyn bobbed his head, tempered by her assuredness. "I mean no insult, my lady. Only that our ways are harsh, shaped by winter and centuries of old grudges. We must adapt to your presence as you must adapt to ours." Jon allowed the tension to settle. "We'll adapt and we'll forge something stronger. But we can't wait passively. The question remains, how do we prove this threat is real to those beyond the north? How do we gather the resources we need from the southern lords who still question it all?" Sansa tapped her gloved fingers on the table. "Perhaps the fastest route is to approach Daenerys Targaryen, as we've discussed. Word of her dragons has spread. If dragons truly exist once more, they might be our greatest weapon against the Whites. But that alliance will be tricky. She'll expect fealty, perhaps even a bending of the knee." Davos cast a thoughtful look around the table. "We can't simply kneel to any monarch who appears with an army. Jon is king in the north, recognized by his people. Still, we might not have a choice if we want her dragons on our side." Margaery tilted her head, considering. "I suspect Daenerys Targaryen would be more flexible if she truly understands what we face. She has pressed her claim in Essos with talk of freeing slaves and bringing justice. She might be persuaded that the real war is here." Royce cleared his throat. "And what of Cersei Lannister? She holds the throne in King's Landing. We cannot ignore the possibility that she will see any alliance with a Targaryen as treason. The Vale might be forced to choose sides." A hush fell. Jon grimaced. "I've heard no love for Cersei among the Northerners. She brought ruin to the houses who opposed her. She also oversaw the torment of my family. But we cannot fight a war on two fronts against the Lannisters in the south and the Night King in the north." Margaery's voice grew quiet, steady. "Cersei will not bend. She would rather watch the realm burn than yield her power. We might have to make her see the truth in a way she cannot deny." She paused, remembering Olenna's sardonic advice about capturing a White. If we had indisputable proof of the undead, something tangible, we could force at least a temporary truce in the south. Lady Olenna suggested something drastic, even if it means bringing the horror to Cersei's doorstep. Jon studied her, and she could see the conflict in his eyes. I'm not fond of taking a living dead creature on a journey across Westeros, but if that's what it takes. They discussed the logistics for a while longer, eventually concluding that they needed further intelligence from the wall. If the army of the dead advanced, perhaps they could capture a single white. It was a mad plan, dangerous, potentially lethal, but desperation was the shaping force of this new era. The meeting ended with a sense of uneasy resolve. When the lords filed out, Margaery lingered, finding herself alone with Sansa. Snow fluttered past the arrow-slit windows, the draft tugging at Margaery's skirts. Sansa offered a tentative smile. That was well handled. You have a gift for talking to these men, even if they're wary of Tyrell influence. Thank you, Margaery replied, softening. I learned much at King's Landing, though some lessons were harsher than others. I only hope it helps us here. Sansa studied her, then spoke quietly. We both suffered under the Lannisters. I recall that you tried to help me in your own way when I was trapped in King's Landing. I never got the chance to thank you. Margaery's gaze fell for a moment. It was never enough what I managed to do. I'm sorry for that, but I'm grateful we have another chance here and now. Sansa's eyes glimmered with a private gratitude. We do. And for what it's worth, I'm glad Jon found someone who respects him for who he is. Margaery placed a hand gently over Sansa's. He is a good man. We both know that's a rare thing in this world. Sansa's lips curved into a brief smile. Then they parted ways, each lost in her own thoughts about the trials to come. Winter's grip continued to tighten. Over the following weeks, snowfall became heavier and the skies turned leaden. Word spread through the north of an early freeze settling across lakes and streams. The White Harbor docks reported ice floes drifting closer than ever before. Though no one spoke it aloud, a collective breath was held, waiting for the first sign that the army of the dead had crept beyond the wall. Jon trained the men in the courtyard, ensuring they practiced with dragonglass-tipped spears and arrows. Shipments of dragonglass from Dragonstone were rumored but had yet to materialize. No one had truly forged a bond with Daenerys Targaryen's forces. Margaery, too, insisted on learning to handle a blade. She was no warrior, but she refused to be defenseless. Under Brienne of Tarth's guidance, a present Sansa had encouraged, Margaery began to practice every morning, her breath puffing in the cold air as she thrust and parried with a wooden sword. She learned quickly, if only enough to defend herself in a crisis. When not training, Margaery spent her days in Winterfell's library or in conferences with local stewards, ensuring the distribution of supplies. Some nights, she and Jon would slip away to the Godwood, a sanctuary of ancient weirwoods where the carved face of the old gods watched them in silent judgment. The red leaves dripped with melted snow, forming a scarlet canopy against the white expanse. The hush there often offered them a moment's peace. They would talk in low voices about duty, about the future, sometimes about the possibility of children. It felt both terrifying and wondrous to consider bringing new life into a realm so threatened by death. Tormund Giantsbane arrived one gray morning, shaking frost from his red beard. He brought news from Eastwatch, strange sightings at sea, glimpses of what might be whites drifting on shattered ice. Margaery had never encountered a wildling before, and Tormund's body humor caught her off guard. Yet he treated her with unexpected courtesy. He'd heard from Jon and from other free folk that Margaery was an ally worthy of respect. In the great hall that evening, Tormund recounted tales of the far north, feasting on roasted mutton as Margaery and Jon listened intently. We see shapes on the water, he said in a booming voice. Not living men, but not quite dead. The storms are fierce enough to keep them at bay for now. But they'll find a path eventually. Jon's jaw tensed. We need that proof. A single white, captured, might force the southern lords to see reason. Then we could unite all of Westeros. Margaery, sitting beside Jon, glanced at Tormund. How dangerous would it be to capture one? Tormund let out a gruff laugh. Dangerous as it gets, my lady. You don't catch the dead like rabbits in a snare. But we might manage it if we have enough men and if we're smart about it. Jon tapped a finger on the table. We'll need a small, fast force. We can't risk an entire army. The dead would overwhelm large numbers. Fewer men can move quietly, catch a white, and retreat. He glanced at Davos, who nodded with resignation. Madness, but we see no other way. We can't expect the southern lords to ride north to fight a myth. Margaery felt dread coil in her stomach. You'd lead this mission, Jon? She'd known he might, but hearing it aloud made it real. He reached for her hand beneath the table, giving it a reassuring squeeze. I have to. Tormund and I know the terrain. I need men I trust to come with me, Davos, perhaps Gendry if we can find him, and a few seasoned fighters. The rest must stay here to defend Winterfell. Sansa, seated across from them, looked paler than usual. It's reckless, Jon. You're the king in the north. If you die out there. Margaery swallowed, remembering the vow they'd made to stand together. I would urge caution. But I also know that if this plan succeeds, we'll have a chance to unify the realm, at least long enough to repel the worst threat in living memory. Tormund grunted approval. The king in the north fights with his men. That's the way of things. Sansa said nothing more, but her eyes brimmed with worry. The table was silent a moment, each person grappling with the enormity of what lay ahead. Margaery gently squeezed Jon's hand in return, her heart pounding. She understood the necessity but dreaded the possibility of losing him. This was the cost of leadership, she reminded herself, risking everything for the sake of the people who looked to you for protection. Jon surveyed them all. Let's plan it carefully. We wait for the right moment. Tormund, get me more details on where we might find a white separated from the main horde. We must be certain we can trap one without dooming ourselves. Tormund nodded, finishing his mug of ale with a swipe of his forearm. I'll see what I can do, Crow. The tension that gripped the hall lingered long after Tormund left. Shadows flickered against the walls, cast by the flames in the hearth. The hush that settled felt like the lull before a storm. The next day dawned with a dull sun masked by clouds. Margaery woke early, a whisper of unease circling her thoughts. She dressed in layers, woolen undergarments, a plain gown, fur-lined boots. She found Jon already in the courtyard, overseeing the departure of several ravens. The birds flapped noisily, scattering bits of straw. Nearby, Sansa observed, a fur cloak around her shoulders. Lyanna Mormont and Davos prepared to ride out for some business in one of the nearby villages. The courtyard bustled with men-at-arms readying horses, their breath steaming in the chill air. Margaery made her way to Jon, who stood by the raven cages scanning a piece of parchment. His expression was set, worry etched into the corners of his eyes. She reached out and touched his arm. More news, she asked. He exhaled. A raven from the citadel. Samwell Tarly wrote that he's discovered some mention of a hidden cache of dragoglass near the Frostfangs. It's old lore, uncertain, but if it exists, it might help. Though the citadel itself remains frustratingly aloof. Most of the maesters still insist the real war is over in the south. She frowned, frustration mounting. Fools. They hide behind scholarship while an undead army looms. Jon's gaze flitted to her, and for a brief moment, his expression softened at her outrage. They've never seen what we've seen. It's easier to doubt than to believe in horrors. Before Margaery could respond, a messenger dashed across the courtyard. He wore the sigil of House Royce, panting in the cold as he approached. My lord, a raven arrived from the Vale. Lord Yohn Royce's presence is requested back at the Eyrie. Some trouble with mountain clans, they say. Jon nodded, though disappointment flickered in his eyes. He's been a valuable voice here. If the Vale is threatened, we can't stop him from going back. The messenger bowed, then hurried off. Margaery folded her arms, pressing them against the chill. Every day, we lose or gain small pieces in this grand puzzle. I wish we had a simpler path. Jon studied the courtyard. I've rarely known a simple path, Margaery. But I do know that no one else will save us if we don't save ourselves. She nodded gravely. The two walked together toward the main doors, where a faint warmth beckoned inside. Passing through the corridor, they found themselves once again in Winterfell's great hall. Sansa was there, speaking with a steward about provisions. Overhearing Margaery and Jon's voices, she dismissed the steward, then greeted them with a small, polite smile. I'm to review the storehouses, Sansa explained. Make sure we have enough for the coming months. Lady Margaery, would you walk with me? We might use your keen sense of organization. Jon arched an eyebrow at Margaery in silent question. She touched his hand in a fleeting farewell. I'd be pleased to join you, Sansa. They set off, leaving Jon to tend to his duties. With a few guards in tow, the two women descended a spiral staircase that led to Winterfell's cellars. The smell of cold stone and preserved grain enveloped them. Torches cast flickering light on rows of barrels, sacks of flour, salted meats, pickled vegetables. Servants moved carefully in the gloom, taking stock, hauling crates. Sansa stopped here and there to run a gloved hand along the top of a barrel or to ask a question of a storehouse keeper. Margaery kept pace, occasionally offering suggestions. We might rotate the barley to the outer walls, she said at one point, remembering how the Tyrell storehouses prioritized items with shorter shelf lives near the front. It's more susceptible to damp, and the dryness near the hearths might preserve it better. Sansa considered. We haven't done that before, but it's worth a try. I'll instruct the stewards to rearrange it. She paused, turning to Margaery. You manage all this with surprising ease, considering the North is so different from the Reach. Margaery brushed a stray curl from her forehead. Managing resources is the same at its core, whether you're storing grain in Highgarden or Winterfell. The climate changes the details, but the principles remain. And I've always believed that the well-being of our people depends on these practical measures. Without enough food, talk of alliances and wars means nothing. Sansa listened, then gave a small nod. I appreciate your help. I truly do. I've spent so much time trying to survive, to hold Winterfell together, that I sometimes forget I can ask for assistance. Margaery placed a hand on her arm. It's a burden you shouldn't have to bear alone. Jon is a good leader, but he relies on you, on all of us. You can rely on us in turn. A flicker of emotion crossed Sansa's face, something between relief and lingering caution. She glanced around to ensure no servants hovered too close, then lowered her voice. It means a great deal to me to hear that. We haven't always had the best luck with alliances, especially with southern houses. The memory of our father's execution at King's Landing, it shaped the North's distrust. Margaery's throat tightened at the mention of Ned Stark's fate. She remembered the horror of that day. I understand. It's a wound that may never fully heal. But I promise you, Sansa, I will do whatever I can to honor your father's legacy and protect his family. They resumed their inspection in thoughtful silence. Soon, they emerged back into the courtyard, blinking against the bright midday light reflected on snow. The conversation had drawn them closer, forging a quiet bond between women who had both known captivity and loss. Yet as they stood in the crisp air, Margaery spotted a new arrival through the open gates, a group of riders bearing the sigil of House Tarly. Her heart gave a small jolt. House Tarly served House Tyrell, but the old alliances had grown complicated, and Randall Tarly himself rarely ventured north. Sansa followed her gaze. Visitors from Horn Hill? They hurried across the courtyard, guards trailing. The lead rider dismounted, revealing a tall, older man with a stern face. Lord Randall Tarly in the flesh, clad in thick travel garments. Behind him were half a dozen knights, faces drawn from a long journey. Margaery approached, Sansa at her side, as Lord Tarly bowed stiffly. "My Lady Margaery, Lady Sansa," he said, his voice echoing in the chilly air. "A harsh land you call home here." Sansa replied with polite composure. "We endure. You are most welcome at Winterfell, Lord Tarly. Might I ask what brings you so far north?" He straightened, eyes flicking to Margaery. "I come on behalf of Lady Olenna Tyrell. She asked me to deliver a message in person, and to ensure that House Tyrell's interests are properly represented." Margaery forced a smile. "I see. Then let us speak inside, where we can offer you some warmth." She guided him toward the great hall, where Jon had already arrived, alerted by the gate guards. Davos, too, hovered near the dais, his expression guarded. Margaery sensed the tension swirling. Randall Tarly was known for his rigid sense of honor, tempered by a pride that often verged on hostility. She remembered how coldly he'd treated Samwell Tarly. She wondered what scorn he might harbor for her marriage to a northern king. Once seated by the hearth with mulled wine poured, Randall Tarly addressed them all. "Lady Olenna wishes to confirm the terms of the Tyrell-Stark alliance. Grain and provisions are to be sent north, yes, but only if the Tyrell name and lands are safeguarded against potential Lannister reprisals. Lady Olenna also wishes an update on your progress in rallying other houses to the cause of defeating these creatures beyond the wall." Jon regarded him evenly. "We are doing all we can to unify the North, my lord. The threat is real, though we lack a demonstration that will convince the South. We mean to rectify that soon." Tarly's expression remained carved from stone. "So I've heard. A fool's errand to capture one of these monsters, if you ask me. But perhaps it's the only way. The Lannisters remain strong, though. If your mission fails, House Tyrell will have exposed itself for nothing. My Lady Margaery stands to lose her own birthright if this alliance crumbles." Margaery carefully kept her tone respectful. "My grandmother knows as well as I do that if the dead are not stopped, Highgarden itself will eventually fall. I'd rather risk our resources on the only hope that can save us than wait to be overrun by an unstoppable army." Tarly met her gaze, the lines of his face unyielding, yet something in her words must have pricked his conscience. He gave a short nod. "Very well. I am commanded to stay in Winterfell for a time, to observe your preparations. I want to see with my own eyes that the Tyrell resources are put to good use." Jon exchanged a glance with Margaery, who responded smoothly, "We'd be glad to host you, my lord. You'll find we run an organized household. Any advice you can offer will be welcome." Tarly grunted, "I'm sure I'll have plenty of advice." With that, the conversation ended as abruptly as it began. Servants showed him to his quarters, and Margaery let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Jon placed a hand on the small of her back. She felt his concern, more intimate than any words could convey. "He's difficult," Jon murmured softly, "but perhaps he'll see reason if he stays here long enough to witness what we face." She nodded, her mind drifting to Lady Olenna's motivations. Perhaps her grandmother was testing whether Margaery's marriage was as solid as the realm presumed. Or perhaps she was simply ensuring that none of their resources went astray. Either way, the tension grew, another strand in the intricate web of alliances that might break or hold depending on the moves ahead. Over the next several weeks, Winterfell's courtyard became a spectacle of conflicting northern and southern styles as Randyll Tarly's men trained alongside Stark bannermen. The Tarly knights scoffed at the wildling approach to fighting, while Tormund's free folk gave as good as they got in jibes about southern fancy dancing with swords. Yet Margaery could see the grudging respect developing on both sides. When steel clashed against steel, the differences in accent and manner vanished. All that remained was skill, grit, and the relentless cold that settled in the bones. Lord Tarly himself spent hours surveying the castle's defenses, questioning the quartermasters about supply lines, offering pointed critiques. He was especially interested in the dragon-glass weapons being forged under Jon's direction. One afternoon, he requested a demonstration. Davos and Margaery were present, along with several captains from both the North and the Reach. They gathered near the smithy where Gendry, the black-haired young man who'd found his way north, had taken over forging tasks. Gendry held a dragonglass dagger aloft, the dark obsidian glinting in the weak sunlight. Lord Tarly tested its balance, then scowled. "Is this fragile stone," he said. "It can fracture easily. How does it fare against steel, let alone the undead?" Gendry shrugged, unruffled. "It's not meant for steel. Dragonglass kills whites and White Walkers. Against living men, we'd still use steel. But if you're cornered by the dead, one strike from this and they'll shatter into ice and bones." Tarly's eyes narrowed. Supposition and legend. Jon, standing nearby, spoke calmly. "We've seen it happen, my lord. I killed a White Walker myself with a Valyrian steel blade. Dragonglass has the same effect." Tarly grunted, clearly unconvinced, but he did not argue further. Margaery sensed he was storing every observation away for later judgment. She stepped forward, taking one of the daggers from the table. The obsidian felt strangely light yet sharp enough to slice a finger with the barest slip. She could see her reflection in the glassy surface. "If one day you face a white, my lord, you'll be grateful for these," she said, meeting Tarly's gaze. "Even if you doubt now, keep one at your belt." He studied her for a moment, then exhaled. "I do not doubt your sincerity, my lady. Only the practicality of this entire affair. Still, I will do as you suggest." She returned the dagger to the table, stepping back as the demonstration ended. She noticed Tormund in the corner, grinning widely at Tarly's begrudging acceptance. The tension was thick, yet day by day, a layer of mutual necessity bound the Northerners, the Wildlings, and the Reach men together. In the face of a threat that cared nothing for borders or titles, old rivalries seemed to inch closer to dissolution. In the gray hush of early morning, Jon was awakened by urgent knocking at his chamber door. Margaery stirred beside him, and he quickly rose, slipping into his clothes. A guard stood outside, breathless with news. "A raven, my lord," the guard panted. "From Eastwatch." Jon thanked him, took the parchment, and read it by the flickering sconce in the hallway. His jaw tightened, and Margaery, peering over his shoulder, saw the lines of worry deepen on his face. "What is it?" she asked, her pulse quickening. He handed her the message. "Tormund writes that a small group of whites has been sighted near the shore. They're scattered from the main army, perhaps scouting or wandering. This might be our chance." She scanned the terse words. Tormund had detailed how a handful of undead figures seemed to roam the area as though searching for something. If Jon moved quickly, a team might capture one. But the risk was formidable. If the group was just a trickle of a larger horde, they could be overwhelmed in moments. "You mean to leave at once?" Margaery murmured, looking up at him. It was not a question. Jon nodded gravely. "This is the opportunity we've been waiting for. We can't let it slip away." Her heart thudded. She wanted to insist he stay, that it was too dangerous. But she knew him too well. His sense of responsibility would never allow him to send others in his place. She swallowed the lump in her throat. Then I'll help gather your men. He touched her cheek, something haunted in his eyes. I'll be careful. Within hours, the courtyard was a flurry of activity. Jon selected a small group, Davos, Gendry, who had proven himself loyal and tireless, Beric Dondarrion and the Hound both had arrived unexpectedly some time earlier on a quest of their own, claiming the Lord of Light had shown them visions of the coming fight. And Jorah Mormont returned from service to Daenerys. Tormund was already waiting at Eastwatch. As they prepared, Margaery assisted in gathering supplies, dragonglass weapons, ropes and chains they might use to restrain a white, medical provisions, and warm cloaks. At the edge of the courtyard, Lord Tarly watched with arms folded. His knights stood in silence, though some murmured prayers. Sansa lingered beside Margaery, looking as if she might be ill with worry. The sun hung low in the sky, winter's short day lending them precious little light. Finally, Jon approached Margaery. He wore thick furs, Longclaw at his hip, and the resolute look of a man walking into near-certain peril. She felt her breath catch, but she forced composure. "Stay safe," she whispered, reaching to brush a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "Remember, you must return." He nodded, his hand covering hers. "I will. I promise." For a moment, their eyes locked, the rest of the world fading. Then he kissed her, a fierce press of lips that carried all the unspoken fears they couldn't articulate in front of the gathered onlookers. Breaking away, he swung onto his horse. The small company followed suit, riding out of Winterfell's gates in a tight formation. Margaery stood with Sansa on the battlements, watching until the riders were specks on the horizon, swallowed by swirling snow. A quiet heaviness settled on her chest, and she realized Sansa was gripping the stone rampart so tightly her knuckles turned white. "They'll come back," Margaery said softly, as if by speaking the words she could will it into truth. Sansa did not reply, but she slowly withdrew her hand from the stone. They both stared into the distance until the day grew late and the cold too biting to linger. Days crept by like half-frozen streams. Margaery tried to keep busy, assisting with the storehouses, reassuring frightened servants, overseeing training. Lord Tarly persistently questioned the wisdom of sending Jon Snow away on what he called a foolhardy expedition. She bit back her anger each time, calmly repeating that Jon was doing what was necessary to save the realm. Sansa withdrew into herself, gliding through her tasks with a grim determination. Sometimes Margaery would find her gazing at the horizon from the battlements, lips moving in silent prayer to gods old or new. Winterfell's mood became hushed, as if waiting for a verdict that might arrive any day. Or might never arrive at all. Messages from Eastwatch failed to come, no raven soared in the sky. Whispers among the guards suggested something terrible might have happened, that perhaps the entire mission had been lost. Margaery refused to let herself believe it, but the fear gnawed at her dreams. More than once, she woke in a cold sweat, reaching for Jon's side of the bed only to find it empty and cold. Then, on a morning when the wind howled with savage intensity, a raven arrived at last. Margaery rushed to the hall where Sansa, Davos, who had remained behind after all, Jon had chosen a smaller group than first planned, and Tarly stood waiting. The maester, trembling with excitement, read the contents aloud. Jon's party had succeeded. They had captured a white but found themselves surrounded by a larger force of the undead. Only the intervention of Daenerys Targaryen and her dragons had saved them at great cost. One dragon had been killed and turned by the Night King. Margaery's blood ran cold at those words, a dragon, undead. She pressed a hand to her mouth in horror. But the message continued. Jon Snow had nearly died, falling into freezing water only to be pulled out by his uncle, Benjen Stark. He lived, if barely, and was recovering on board a Targaryen ship bound for Dragonstone. Daenerys herself was ferrying them south, white in tow, intending to present it to Cersei Lannister in a parley. The final line read, "We will return to the north soon. Stand ready." The maester's voice trailed off into silence. The assembled lords and retainers exchanged shocked glances. A hush filled the hall, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Sansa exhaled, sagging slightly in relief. "He lives." Margaery closed her eyes for a moment, whispering her gratitude. Then she squared her shoulders. "We must prepare for his return and for the possibility that a truce might be forged in King's Landing. If Daenerys Targaryen stands with us against the Night King, the realm may yet unite." Lord Tarly's expression was grim. I have no love for Cersei Lannister, but her cunning should not be underestimated. She might feign cooperation only to strike when our guard is down." Margaery nodded. "I know her well enough to suspect as much. Yet if Daenerys Targaryen holds the advantage with her dragons, perhaps that will keep Cersei in line. This white they captured, showing it to all, might be the key to forcing a temporary alliance." Davos scratched his bearded jaw. We can hope, but we'll need to gather our own men, see them equipped. If a truce is declared, it won't last forever. We have to be ready for the real fight, with or without the South's help. Sansa, her eyes bright with a fierce relief, turned to the guards. Spread the word. The king in the north lives, and soon we'll have more news of the alliance. Make sure the men are training daily with the dragonglass. Keep the storehouses secure. Winter is here, but we'll endure. Margaery placed a hand over her heart, still trying to steady her breath. Jon was alive. She silently thanked any god who might be listening. The news about the undead dragon haunted her, a monstrous reality that changed the balance of power in unimaginable ways. But she let that dread settle in the back of her mind. For now, hope blossomed that they might see him again and that his mission had not been in vain. Time blurred as Margaery oversaw Winterfell's final arrangements for the ultimate conflict. She made sure the blacksmiths worked double time to craft dragonglass arrows, spearheads, and short swords. She assigned workers to reinforce the gates with iron and wood. Sansa coordinated with the Manderleys, the Serwans, and the Umbers, ensuring that their bannermen were on standby to march at a moment's notice. Lord Tarly, still skeptical, provided occasional suggestions for how to organize the lines of supply across the winter roads. Though tension lingered, Margaery recognized that even he saw the writing on the wall. The war against the dead was real, and it threatened everyone. Messages arrived sporadically from the south. Reports claimed Daenerys and Jon Snow had presented their captured White in the Dragonette at King's Landing. The spectacle horrified the gathered lords. Cersei, unnerved, had agreed in principle to a truce, though rumors suggested she had no intention of truly honoring it. Still, Daenerys was said to be heading north with her army along with the might of House Stark behind her. It was the best outcome they could have hoped for. At long last, the day came when Daenerys Targaryen's host, accompanied by Jon Snow, crossed the neck and approached Winterfell. Margaery stood on the ramparts with Sansa, Tarly, and a host of onlookers as the Targaryen banners appeared on the horizon, three-headed dragons on a field of black, mingled with the Stark direwolf banner. The sight was nothing short of historic. Even the weather seemed to hold its breath, the wind dying to a hush as the column of unsullied Dothraki riders and northern outriders streamed toward the gates. The gates opened. Jon Snow entered first on horseback, flanked by the tall, silver-haired figure of Daenerys Targaryen. Behind them rode Tyrion Lannister, recognizable by his stature and the curious glances of the Northerners who had never seen a Lannister as an ally. Margaery's heart pounded. She hurried down from the battlements, Sansa and Tarly close behind, the snow crunching beneath their boots. In the courtyard, the unsmiling faces of the Unsullied contrasted sharply with the bearded northern guards. Nearby, Dothraki warriors peered at the unfamiliar architecture, likely reminded of far-off Essos. Then Margaery's gaze locked on Jon as he dismounted. Wincing slightly, he looked thinner and still pale, as though the chill of icy water clung to his bones. But the sight of him standing there, alive, made emotion swell in her chest. "Jon," she breathed, stepping forward. She resisted the urge to run to him in front of so many eyes. Instead, she inclined her head with regal composure. But he cut through the formalities, striding to her and taking her hands in his. "I'm all right," he said quietly, though she saw the shadow of exhaustion in his eyes. "We did it." She squeezed his hands, letting out a trembling breath. "Welcome home." Daenerys dismounted with a fluid motion, her white fur cloak billowing behind her. She surveyed Winterfell with cool interest, her violet eyes lingering on the ancient stone walls. A hush fell as she approached. The northern lords bowed awkwardly. They recognized that Jon had declared an alliance with this Targaryen queen, though they did not kneel. Sansa stepped forward, head held high. "Your Grace," Sansa said formally on behalf of House Stark, "welcome to Winterfell." Daenerys regarded her for a moment, then inclined her head. "Thank you, Lady Sansa. I hope we can stand together against our common enemy." Margaery observed the two women. Both had endured captivity and hardship, Sansa under the Lannisters, Daenerys in Essos. Both had emerged as formidable leaders in their own right. The tension was there, beneath the surface, yet each recognized the necessity of unity. Tyrion Lannister approached, bowing slightly. Margaery felt a jolt of familiarity. She remembered Tyrion from King's Landing, a man of sharp wit and unexpected kindness. He offered a small, rueful smile at the sight of her. "Lady Margaery." An unexpected reunion. She responded with a measured smile. "The world has changed, Lord Tyrion." "Indeed." He looked up at the looming towers of Winterfell. "We have urgent business here, but I must say your presence surprises me less than it ought to. You always had a way of surviving where others failed." She let that statement hang. Now is not the time to reminisce. Jon gestured for everyone to move inside, away from the cold. The new arrivals were shown to the great hall, where fires had been stoked and tables laden with simple winter fare, stews, bread, and salted meats. Soldiers would camp outside or in the courtyard, filling every available corner of Winterfell. Daenerys's dragons, only 2 remaining, circled overhead, their roars echoing across the hills. Many northerners stared skyward, fear mingled with awe. In the hall, the leadership gathered. Jon, Daenerys, Sansa, Margaery, Davos, Tyrion, Grey Worm, Jorah Mormont, Lord Tarly, Brienne of Tarth, and a handful of trusted bannermen. The atmosphere was tense, but as soon as they were seated, Jon recounted what had happened north of the Wall, the capture of the White, the rescue by Daenerys's dragons, the Night King's spear that brought down Viserion, who was now enslaved by the undead. The silence was broken only by the crackle of the fires and the stunned whispers of a few onlookers. When Jon finished, Daenerys spoke, her tone solemn. "We saw the threat with our own eyes. This is no fairy tale. The army of the dead marches, led by the Night King who commands an undead dragon. Our defenses must be solidified here. My unsullied Dothraki are at your disposal." Sansa looked to Jon, eyes filled with alarm. "A dragon under his command, how can we hope to stand against that?" Daenerys lifted her chin. "Rhaegal and Drogon remain. Fire against ice. If we can lure the Night King into battle on our terms, we have a chance." Lord Tarly couldn't conceal his astonishment. Dragons fighting dragons, the realm has not seen such a thing since the Dance of the Dragons generations ago. Tyrion, hands folded, said quietly, "It's a grim symmetry, indeed." Jon ran a hand through his hair, clearly exhausted. "The White Walkers won't wait long. They'll press south as soon as the winter storms allow them. We need to fortify Winterfell as our main line of defense. If we fail here, the dead will spill across the continent." Margaery found her voice. "We have men mustering from across the north. House Tyrell will send further supplies, though it's uncertain how quickly they can arrive. If we coordinate with Daenerys's forces, we might hold the line." Daenerys gave Margaery a measured look, a flicker of curiosity crossing her features. "Your support is most welcome, Lady Margaery. I recall hearing of you in King's Landing. Once Loras Tyrell mentioned you often, though we never met." Margaery swallowed a pang of sadness at the mention of her brother, lost in the chaos of war. "He spoke highly of you as well, Your Grace, though it was long ago. My house stands with the North now, but we share the same goal, defeating the Night King and preserving the living. That matters more than any old claims or rivalries." Daenerys acknowledged her words with a solemn incline of her head. "Then let us stand together." Sansa exhaled, turning her gaze around the table. "We have a common cause. Let us do what we must to prepare. Winterfell's walls can be strengthened, but we also have Moat Cailin and the smaller keeps. If the dead bypass Winterfell somehow, we risk losing everything behind us." Jon nodded. "We'll form a plan of defense for the entire region. We'll send ravens to every holdfast. They must evacuate to Winterfell or band together in strategic locations. This will be a battle of survival, not glory." The discussion continued for hours, the newly allied factions ironing out details. Margaery listened closely, interjecting where her knowledge might help. She saw how Daenerys and Jon exchanged glances, a shared determination born of facing death together. She felt a pang of recognition, remembering the bond forged between her and Jon as well. She wished they could share a moment alone to speak freely. But the realm demanded their attention. Eventually, the gathering concluded and the lords and generals dispersed to make arrangements. Margaery lingered until only she, Jon, and Sansa remained in the hall. Jon sank onto a bench, pressing a hand to his side as though it pained him. "Are you all right?" Margaery asked gently, moving to kneel beside him. He forced a faint smile. "Just wounds still healing. The water beyond the wall nearly killed me. My uncle's sacrifice. I owe him my life." Sansa reached out, pressing her palm to Jon's shoulder. "We all owe him a great debt. We'll honor him by winning this war." Jon inclined his head, eyes distant. "Yes, we must." Sansa stood, giving them a small, respectful nod. "I'll see to the preparations. You should rest, Jon." Then she departed, leaving them in the quiet glow of the dying fire. When they were alone, Margaery placed a hand gently over Jon's. She saw the lines of fatigue bracketing his eyes, the weight he carried on his shoulders. "I've been so worried," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly now that the formality of counsel was gone. "When you fell into that ice, I thought I'd lost you." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss against her knuckles. "I almost died. I'm sorry I couldn't send word sooner." She swallowed hard, then slid her arms around him, resting her head on his chest. He pulled her close, his breath warm against her hair. In that moment, the burden of duty fell away, replaced by the simple relief of two people who had found each other despite the storms raging around them. She felt his heart beating, steady and real, a testament to the life they still clung to. They stayed like that for a time, letting the hush of Winterfell's hall envelop them. At length, Jon drew back, a determined light in his eyes. I made a vow to fight for the living. That includes you, includes us. I won't let this darkness swallow us. She nodded, blinking away tears. Nor will I. Our enemies are countless, Cersei's schemes, the undead, even the unpredictable power of Daenerys's dragons. But we've come this far. We'll see it through. He stroked her cheek, then rose, offering her his arm. She accepted, and together they walked through the dim corridors to their chambers. Snow fell outside, drifting through the high windows. Servants passed, bowing hastily, their footsteps echoing in the quiet. Margaery glanced at Jon's profile, at the set of his jaw. So many unknowns lay ahead. But she would stand beside him no matter how fierce the storm became. In the days that followed, Winterfell transformed into a fortress prepared for the end of days. Wagons bearing grain and provisions from the Reach arrived, though never as many as they needed. House Tyrell had done its best, but the roads were treacherous and the War of the Five Kings had drained resources throughout the land. Yet even that partial supply boosted morale, reminding the Northerners that they were not fighting alone. Daenerys spent her mornings on the walls with Jon, discussing strategy and scanning the skies for any sign of the Night King's approach. Her dragons roost on the outskirts of Winterfell, devouring sheep from the flocks that had been gathered for them. At times, the beast soared overhead, casting immense shadows on the snowy ground. Northern children gaped in awe and fear, while older men muttered about how unnatural it was to see dragons in these ancient lands. Margaery found herself mediating between the newcomers and the northern lords, smoothing over tensions. The Dothraki, restless and unaccustomed to cold, tested the patience of Stark bannermen with their wild ways. The Unsullied were more disciplined, but their stony silence unnerved the more outspoken freefolk. Even the Tyrell knights who had come north to protect Margaery found themselves overwhelmed by the swirling mix of cultures. Yet day by day, a shared purpose bound them closer. They traded fighting techniques, huddled around the same fires, told stories of Essos, the Reach, and beyond. One evening, as the sky darkened to a deep violet, Daenerys sought Margaery out in the library. Margaery had been reading a book on old Targaryen histories, hoping to glean any insight into how the northern snows might affect dragonflight. She rose when the queen entered, bowing her head politely. Daenerys waved off the formality. We never had the chance to speak privately, Daenerys said, her voice measured but not unkind. You and I both lived at King's Landing under dangerous circumstances, yet we never met. I regret that. Margaery gave a small, wry smile. We were always separated by a continent. Even so, I heard your name often. I never imagined I'd meet you here in Winterfell on the brink of a battle against an undead army. Daenerys studied the shelves for a moment, running her fingertips across dusty tomes. I've heard you were married to 3 kings in your time, Renly Baratheon, Joffrey Baratheon, and Tommen Baratheon, each alliance short-lived. Now you stand as queen in the north, wife to Jon Snow. You seem uniquely experienced in forging royal bonds. Margaery's heart twinged at the memory of those ill-fated marriages. Experience born of tragedy, your grace. None of those unions gave me what this one has. Jon and I share a purpose that transcends the usual politics. Daenerys turned, a faint curiosity shining in her violet eyes. And you're content with him? I see how he looks at you with genuine devotion. That is rare for a king. Margaery felt a mixture of pride and protectiveness. Jon never wanted to be king. Neither did I truly seek to be queen again. But fate or the gods or circumstance thrust us together. And I've come to love him in a way I never expected. Daenerys nodded, a flicker of something sadness or acceptance crossing her features. He's an honorable man. He nearly died to prove it. I confess, at first I resented that he wouldn't bend the knee, but in time I saw that he is not a typical ruler. He's driven by duty, not ambition. Margaery watched Daenerys carefully. She sensed no open malice, only a lingering uncertainty. It's good you understand that. He's not the type to play games. He will stand by you in this war, your grace, so long as we stand by him. A quiet tension lingered, the subtle awareness that Daenerys was once an outsider with a claim on all of Westeros. Margaery was a daughter of the Reach, shaped by southern courts, but now a queen in the north. Their lines of loyalty crisscrossed in complicated ways. Yet the threat of the Night King overshadowed any competition between them. Daenerys glanced at the book Margaery had been reading, an old Targaryen genealogical record. You're researching my family? Margaery closed it gently. I was looking for references to dragons fighting in cold climates. The Targaryens mostly battled in southern or temperate lands. The war we face is unlike anything in your family's lore. But maybe I'll find something useful. Daenerys offered a faint smile. If we survive, you might write your own account for future generations to read. A brittle laugh escaped Margaery. If there are future generations indeed. They exchanged a look of shared grim understanding, then parted ways, each carrying the weight of a realm's fate on her shoulders. Snow fell day and night. The north seemed to brace itself for an onslaught. Scouts reported that the army of the dead was on the march, slowly but inexorably moving past the wall. The undead dragon had been sighted patrolling the skies, its icy breath capable of tearing through entire fortifications. Fear rippled through the allied forces. Only the knowledge that 2 living dragons remained under Daenerys' command offered any solace. At last, word came that the dead would reach Winterfell within days. An unearthly cold spread across the land, a chill so deep it felt like a harbinger of doom. Jon, Daenerys, Sansa, Margaery, and the rest of the War Council finalized their battle plan. Defenses were erected outside the castle walls. Trenches lined with dragonglass-tipped spikes, barricades of logs, and earthen ramparts. The plan called for the Dothraki to harass the undead from the flanks, while the Unsullied held strategic choke points. The northern forces would defend the walls, aided by House Tyrell knights and any other southern volunteers. The dragons would strike from above, searching for the Night King among the masses. Killing him might destroy the entire undead force in one stroke, if they could manage it. As the fateful night drew near, Margaery stood atop Winterfell's walls beside Jon, her cloak whipping in the wind. They gazed into the dark horizon. Torches burned below, illuminating thousands of allied soldiers, their silhouettes stark against the snow. The hush of impending conflict weighed on them all. Jon took Margaery's hand in his. "We've done everything we can. Now it's up to the gods and our own courage." She squeezed his hand, her breath forming clouds in the freezing air. "Whatever happens, we stand together." He turned to her, his voice catching. "I never thought I'd find you in this life. A partner who understands the burden of duty, who shares it. Thank you for standing by me." Tears pricked her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. "We've both seen too much loss. If we can win this, let's build a future worthy of the sacrifices." He nodded, pulling her closer, pressing a brief but fierce kiss to her brow. Then, with a final lingering look, they parted, Jon descending the steps to join the command group with Daenerys, and Margaery heading to her post within the castle, where she would coordinate the healers and oversee the defenses if the walls were breached. Time felt both endless and heartbreakingly short. The moments ticked past in excruciating anticipation. Then, through the swirling snow came the first shrieks. A horn blast resonated across the night sky. The army of the dead had arrived. Atop the walls, archers tensed, their arrows tipped with dragonglass. In the field below, the front lines lit trenches aflame, creating lines of fire to slow the undead's advance. The flickering light revealed a horror beyond imagination. Thousands upon thousands of wights, their eyes glowing with an unnatural blue, surging forward in a relentless wave. At their center loomed towering white walkers on dead horses, pale blades in hand. The Dothraki charged, their battle cries echoing. War cries met the eerie silence of the undead, and for a moment, the night was lit by the arc of flaming aurochs. But the wave of wights engulfed them swiftly. From the castle walls, Margaery's heart clenched at the sight of the chaos. She forced herself to remain calm, directing a group of healers to stand by the gates. If the wounded made it back, they would need immediate attention. Jon, Daenerys, and the dragons soared overhead, unleashing torrents of flame that incinerated swathes of the undead. Roars split the night, flames dancing against the snow. Soldiers shouted, steel clashed on ice. The hiss of undead meeting dragonglass resounded like 1,000 whispers of death. Suddenly, a piercing screech cut through the din. The undead dragon Viserion swooped down in a torrent of blue fire that shattered a section of the castle's outer defenses. Men and women screamed as the ice fire consumed them, leaving behind only scorched earth. Daenerys roared a command to Drogon, diving to meet the abomination in aerial combat. Their silhouettes circled in a lethal dance above Winterfell, flames clashing in the sky. Margaery marshaled her courage, standing near the courtyard. The walls shook under the impact of the undead hordes. She caught a glimpse of Brienne fighting alongside Jaime Lannister, who had arrived with a small force, seeking redemption, their blades flashing. Grey Worm led the Unsullied in disciplined ranks, stabbing whites with spears tipped in dragonglass. A soldier stumbled through the gate, bloodied and half-frozen. Margaery rushed forward, helping him to the side where a healer waited. The man gasped out that the lines had collapsed in the eastern flank. The dead were pouring in. She barked orders to the knights behind her, directing them to reinforce that section. Amid the surge of panic, she spotted the distinct figure of Lord Tarly, fighting with grim determination, a dragonglass-dipped sword in hand. He hacked at whites, refusing to yield an inch of ground. Their eyes met for a fleeting second, a silent acknowledgement that all the old quarrels meant nothing now. Only survival mattered. Then came a thunderous crash. A part of the castle wall crumbled under the assault of the undead dragon's icy flame. Through the swirling debris, whites poured in. Margaery felt a surge of terror. She brandished a short sword coated in dragonglass dust, stepping back as a group of them lunged. Before she could strike, a northern guard smashed the nearest white with a hammer. Another seized her cloak, skeletal fingers clawing. She slashed desperately, the dragonglass severing its arm. The creature collapsed into shards of ice, limbs twitching even as they dissolved. The courtyard erupted into chaos, undead toppling over each other in their mindless hunger. Margaery found herself back-to-back with a Tyrell knight who had followed her north. He fought valiantly, but the press of whites was relentless. Above them, Regal and the undead Viserion clashed, screeching into the freezing night. Droplets of dragon blood, fiery red and icy blue, rained onto the battlefield, sizzling wherever they landed. Amid the pandemonium, Margaery heard a familiar voice shouting her name. She turned, glimpsing Jon hacking his way through a knot of whites to reach her. His face was streaked with blood and soot, eyes wild. A white walker loomed behind him, raising its blade. She cried out in warning. Jon spun, parrying the blow with long claw. Frost spread along the steel, the clash of magical blades resonating. With a powerful thrust, Jon shattered the White Walker into shards of ice. He staggered, then rushed to Margaery's side, face taut with worry. "You need to get inside," he shouted over the din. She panted, sword in hand. "I won't abandon the fight. The gates are compromised. We must." "Inside," he repeated fiercely, nodding toward the keep. The line of defense was collapsing, whites spilling into the courtyard in overwhelming numbers. "We regroup in the Great Hall." "Go!" Margaery made a swift decision, grabbing the arm of the Tyrell knight. Together, they forced a path to the keep's inner doors, slashing at grasping skeletal hands. She spared a final look at Jon, who plunged back into the fray, leading a group of men to hold back the tide. Her heart lurched, but she knew he had to do this. In the Great Hall, chaos reigned as healers tended to the wounded. Arrows flew from windows, picking off whites that tried to climb the walls. Margaery searched for Sansa and found her ushering civilians deeper into the crypts. Relief coursed through Margaery to see her alive. She joined the effort, guiding those too weak to fight. Children clung to mothers, eyes wide with terror. Every thud of impact reverberated through the stone floors. Hours bled together in the frenzied battle. The Allied forces fought tooth and nail, sustaining heavy losses. Finally, a horn blast echoed from outside, a signal. Margaery dashed to the nearest vantage point. Through the storm of snow and ash, she saw a clash high above. Daenerys on Drogon and Jon on Regal had cornered the Night King astride the undead Viserion. Blue flame met red, lighting the sky with an unholy brilliance. The dragons tore at each other, roars shaking the very heavens. Then, in a devastating final strike, Drogon's jaws closed around Viserion's neck, ripping free a torrent of icy flesh. The undead dragon plummeted, the Night King tumbling from its back. Jon and Daenerys descended in pursuit. The courtyard below went silent for a heartbeat. Then a fierce flash of dragonfire consumed the Night King. A wail of otherworldly fury raked the air. The White Walkers collapsed, and with them, the Whites crumpled into lifeless heaps of bone and ice. Margaery, half collapsed against a pillar, watched in stunned disbelief. One by one, the undead froze in place, no longer animated by the Night King's power. Soldiers gaped, exhausted and bloodied, as the enemy disintegrated. A roar of triumph and relief rose, echoing across the rubble-strewn courtyard. Though devastation marred Winterfell's walls, the living had won. Somehow, impossibly, she stumbled into the courtyard, where the last vestiges of Whites were melting away. Bodies, human and undead, littered the ground, the snow stained red and black. Jon slid off Regal, nearly collapsing from fatigue and wounds. Margaery ran to him, ignoring the burn in her limbs. She cradled his face, searching his eyes. He was alive. Around them, Daenerys sank to her knees, tears streaming as she surveyed the cost of victory. Drogon landed, keening softly in mourning for his fallen sibling. Silence fell, broken only by the sobs of survivors and the crackling of distant flames. Margaery pressed her forehead against Jon's, tears mingling with the blood on his cheek. The realm had narrowly escaped annihilation, but the price paid was staggering. Together, they clung to each other in the midst of the carnage, hearts pounding with the realization that, for now, the darkness had been driven back. In the weeks that followed, a fragile dawn broke over Winterfell. The survivors buried their dead, tended the wounded, and began the slow process of rebuilding. Daenerys remained, sharing in the grief and the relief. Her dragons perched somberly on the remnants of Winterfell's outer ramparts, watching the survivors move among the ruins. Lord Tarly, battered and bruised, quietly acknowledged the bravery he had witnessed, Southern Knights fighting alongside Northern Lords, Dothraki, Unsullied, and even Wildlings. An alliance that had once seemed impossible had saved the realm from the greatest threat it had ever known. Margaery worked tirelessly in the makeshift infirmary, aiding the healers. She offered comfort where she could, coordinating supplies and dealing with the heartbreak that filled every corner of the castle. Jon spent his days directing the reconstruction, refusing to rest until the survivors had shelter. At night, he would collapse into bed beside her, silent tears sometimes escaping him when he thought of those lost friends, bannermen, men and women whose names he had learned over these tumultuous months. One evening, when the worst of the chaos had settled, they found a moment to steal away to the Godwood. The weirwood tree stood silent and watchful, its red leaves stark against the snow. Jon and Margaery walked hand in hand, a hush enveloping them. Neither spoke at first, they simply listened to the whisper of the wind through the branches. At length, Margaery lifted her gaze to Jon's. "We've done what we set out to do. The Night King is gone. The dead are gone." Jon's voice was hoarse. "I never imagined this outcome, that we'd stand here, victorious. I thought, so many times I thought it would end with our deaths." She pressed her gloved hand against his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat. "I'm thankful it did not. There's still so much to do. We have the South to consider, Cersei won't be idle. And Daenerys, she may press her claim on the Iron Throne. The realm is far from peaceful." His arm wrapped around her, pulling her close. "Yes, but we face those challenges as the living, free to make choices. Compared to the endless night we almost faced, that's a gift." She closed her eyes, leaning into the warmth of his cloak. Memories of the battle flickered. Screams, dragonfire, the sight of him leading men into impossible odds. She could almost feel the chill of the Night King's presence lingering in the corners of her mind. But it was over. A new dawn beckoned, one shaped by alliances that had never seemed possible. House Stark and House Tyrell stood united. Daenerys Targaryen had proven she would risk everything to save the world she wished to rule. "What do you want now, Jon?" she whispered. "Peace? A chance to rebuild the North? Or more?" He considered, his brow furrowing slightly. "First, we bury our dead. We heal. We see that those who fought are remembered and honored. Then we see what remains of the kingdoms. If Daenerys claims the throne and rules justly, perhaps we'll have the peace we longed for. If not..." Margaery nodded, reading the unspoken words in his expression. He would not bow to tyranny regardless of whose banner it wore. Yet she sensed that Daenerys might prove a worthy queen, especially after fighting side by side with the North. Time would tell if her aspirations for the throne were tempered by compassion. They lingered a while longer beneath the weirwood, letting the silent trees witness their weariness, their hope, and the fragile bond they had forged. Snowflakes drifted lazily, the sky turning faintly pink with the approach of dawn. Eventually, they made their way back to the castle, stepping over broken stones that awaited repair, passing men and women waking to another day of rebuilding. But in each face, Margaery saw a glimmer of something that had been absent before, a future. People smiled at her, nodded to Jon, clapped him on the shoulder as he passed. Word spread that the king in the north and his southern queen had endured the long night and won. Across the battered courtyard, Dothraki riders shared bread with northern soldiers, Unsullied stood guard with Tyrell knights, and wildlings helped patch walls with stonemasons from the Vale. The snow shimmered with the beginnings of sunrise, painting the scene in pale gold. Margaery breathed in the frigid air, heartful. She remembered how the idea of a union between House Tyrell and a northern king seemed like mere political strategy once. Yet here they were, a true partnership that had saved countless lives. In time, she and Jon would address the next challenges, Cersei, the question of sovereignty, the scars left by the war, but for now, they could stand tall as a united front, supported by the living souls who had chosen cooperation over division. As she walked at Jon's side, she felt a stirring in her chest, a fragile sense that something new and beautiful might grow from the ashes and ice of all they had lost. Perhaps, for once, the seeds of hope would take root, nurtured by the warmth of camaraderie and the willingness of two great houses, Stark and Tyrell, to stand together against any storm. And if winter came again, they would be ready, their bond tempered by the darkest trial imaginable. The North and the Reach were no longer distant worlds. They had become family, forging a legacy in the halls of Winterfell that would echo through the ages, long after the snow melted and the roses bloomed anew.